My voice cracked as I said those words to myself that morning, standing by the kitchen window. The wind outside carried the laughter of birds, but inside me, a storm was brewing. I had spent 70 years on this earth, and never did I imagine that kindness could be repaid with such cruelty. What she told him, those words still echoed in my head, like broken glass scraping against my heart. But I stayed silent. I pretended not to hear. And the next day, well, let's just say things started to change in a way none of them expected. Before I continue, tell me the time and which country you're watching from. I love knowing where my listeners are joining me from. Now, let's go back a little. My name is Margaret Johnson, a 70-year-old retired schoolteacher living in a quiet town in Wisconsin. My husband, Richard, passed away 10 years ago, leaving behind a small house, a beautiful garden, and a heart that still loved deeply. My son, David, was my only child. From the moment he was born, I poured every bit of love I had into him. I worked 2 jobs, skipped meals, and never bought myself new clothes, just to make sure he got the best education possible. When he graduated from college and got married, I thought I'd finally see the reward of all those sacrifices. But life doesn't always reward you the way you expect. His wife, Emily, was beautiful, tall, graceful, and smart. At first, she called me Mom, hugged me every time she came to visit, and even brought flowers from her garden. I thought I had gained a daughter, but little by little, I began to see the cracks. It started with small things rolling her eyes when I offered advice, sighing loudly when I forgot something, whispering into David's ear when I spoke too long. I told myself it was just adjustment. Maybe she's nervous being around her husband's mother, I thought. But soon, the whispers became louder, the stares colder, and the distance wider. Then, that night happened. It was a cold Friday evening. I was sitting in the living room knitting a scarf for my granddaughter, Lily. The fireplace crackled softly, and the TV murmured in the background. David and Emily were in the kitchen, thinking I couldn't hear them, but I did. Emily's voice cut through the quiet like a knife. "David, we need to talk about your mother. She's becoming a burden. I can't live like this anymore. She forgets things. She moves slowly, and she just takes up space." I froze. My hands trembled, the knitting needles slipping from my fingers. David tried to speak softly. "Emily, she's 70. She just needs some help." But Emily interrupted sharply. "Help? David, we can barely afford daycare and the mortgage. You said you'd look into the nursing home near Brooksville, didn't you? Maybe it's time." The room spun. I held my breath, praying she'd take back those words. But she didn't. My son's silence hurt even more. He didn't defend me. He didn't say, "No, she stays with us." He just sighed and said, "I'll think about it." My heart shattered in that moment. Every beat felt like a question. How could my own child even consider that? But I didn't let them know I'd heard. I smiled when they came back into the living room. I even offered them cookies I'd baked that morning. Emily thanked me with that fake smile of hers, the kind people wear when they've already made up their minds about you. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, thinking about every diaper I'd changed, every tear I'd wiped, every birthday cake I'd baked for my son. All the love I gave suddenly felt like dust slipping through my fingers. But as I lay there, something inside me changed. I realized I still had one thing left: my dignity, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that from me. The next morning, I woke up early. The sun hadn't even risen yet. I brewed some tea, sat by the window, and thought long and hard. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to fight. I was going to act. I spent that morning cleaning the house as usual, humming softly, like nothing had happened. Emily walked in later, yawning, wearing her silk robe. "Morning, Margaret," she said casually. I smiled back. "Morning, dear." Inside, though, I was watching, waiting, planning. Around noon, David got a call and stepped out. Emily was alone in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone, talking to someone. I could hear her voice again, cold, careless, dripping with the same arrogance. She doesn't even know what's coming. Honestly, I'll be relieved when it's done. She's just old. I kept washing the dishes. My hands were steady this time. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I just listened and pretended not to hear. But deep inside, I was making a decision that would change everything. Because if they thought I was helpless, they were wrong. Later that evening, I went up to my room, opened the small wooden box my husband had left me before he died. Inside were documents, things even David didn't know about. My late husband had always been clever, and I remembered his last words before he passed. "Margaret, if one day you feel forgotten, look inside this box. It will remind you of who you are." My fingers brushed over the envelope marked property deeds and another labeled insurance policy. My heart beat faster. For the first time in a long while, I smiled. The next day, well, that's when I did something Emily never saw coming. The next morning felt strangely calm. The sun poured through the kitchen window, turning the curtains gold. The same house that once echoed with warmth and laughter now felt cold and unfamiliar. Yet, as I stirred my tea, my mind was clear. Emily walked in wearing her favorite red sweater, phone in hand, as always. "Morning, Margaret," she said, pretending to smile. Her tone had the same sugar-coated sharpness I'd grown used to. "Morning, dear," I replied, setting my cup down gently. My voice didn't shake this time. It was steady, calm, like I already knew something she didn't. She didn't notice the small brown envelope tucked under the newspaper on the table, the very same envelope I had pulled from my husband's box the night before. I spent most of that morning pretending everything was normal. I watered my plants, baked some muffins, and even sang softly to myself. From the outside, I was just a sweet old woman having a regular day. But inside, I was preparing for something bigger. By afternoon, David came back from work, tired and quiet. He kissed Emily's cheek and barely looked my way. That used to sting, but not anymore. I knew my time in this house was about to end, and I was no longer afraid of it. "Mom," he said softly, "can we talk later? Emily and I have been thinking." I smiled and cut him off gently. "Of course, dear. We can talk after dinner." Emily glanced at him quickly, her lips curling into a knowing smirk. She thought she had already won. That evening, I cooked their favorite meal: grilled chicken, mashed potatoes, and apple pie. I served it with a calmness that seemed to confuse her. She kept looking at me like she was waiting for a reaction, waiting for me to ask, "What were you two talking about last night?" But I didn't. I acted as though I knew nothing. After dinner, David cleared his throat. "Mom, we've been thinking about what's best for everyone," he began. "Emily found this really good nursing home just for a while, until what? Until I die?" I wanted to ask, but I stayed quiet. I simply nodded, eyes soft, pretending to think about it. "That's very thoughtful of you both," I said kindly. Emily blinked in surprise. She wasn't expecting me to agree so easily. David looked relieved. "Really? So you're okay with visiting the place tomorrow?" "Of course," I said. "If it makes things easier for you two, I'll see it." That night, as they went upstairs to bed, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the family pictures on the wall. There was one photo of David as a little boy sitting on my lap, smiling with ice cream on his face. I touched the glass gently. "You were my whole world," I whispered. "And tomorrow, I'll remind you of that." I went to bed early, but my heart stayed awake. I kept replaying Richard's words in my mind. If you ever feel forgotten, look inside the box." The next morning, Emily was already dressed, all cheerful and fake as ever. "Ready to go, Margaret?" she asked. "They said we can visit around 10. "Yes, dear," I said, clutching my handbag. Inside it were the papers, everything my husband had left behind. The drive to the nursing home was quiet. Emily hummed along to the radio, tapping her fingers against the steering wheel. David sat beside her, looking unsure, guilt flickering across his face. When we arrived, a kind nurse welcomed us in. The place was clean, bright, and full of friendly faces. They were trying their best to make it look like a home, but I could see the sadness in the eyes of the people sitting in the corners. Forgotten souls, waiting for visits that rarely came. "Isn't it lovely, Margaret?" Emily said in a cheerful tone. "You'll have your own room, 3 meals a day, and people your age to talk to." I smiled faintly. "It is lovely," I said softly. "But tell me, Emily, do you know what love looks like when it's old and tired?" She frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" I turned to David. "Do you remember, son, when your father lost his job and we almost lost the house?" He nodded slowly, his voice quiet. "Yes, I remember." "Do you remember who paid for your college when your scholarship was delayed?" He looked puzzled. "You did, Mom, of course." "And do you remember where that money came from?" I asked. Emily rolled her eyes. "Margaret, this isn't the time." I cut her off, my voice firm but calm. "That money came from this house, the same house you two are living in right now." David blinked. "What do you mean?" I reached into my handbag and handed him the envelope. "Your father transferred the ownership to me before he died. I never mentioned it because family means more than property to me. But since you're thinking about sending me away..." Emily's face drained of color. "Wait, what are you saying?" David opened the papers, reading quickly. His eyes widened. These are the original property deeds." "Mom, this means..." "Yes," I said softly. "It means this house is mine. Every wall, every room, every inch." Silence filled the air. Emily looked furious, but I wasn't done. "I loved you both enough to give you everything," I said, voice trembling with both hurt and pride. "But love isn't blindness. If you think I'm useless, then maybe you've forgotten what true love and sacrifice look like." David's voice cracked. "Mom, I didn't." But Emily stepped forward, face flushed with anger. "You can't do this. You can't just..." I looked at her, calm and composed. "Oh, my dear, I already did." Then, slowly, I stood up, adjusted my coat, and smiled. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have somewhere to be." Emily glared at me, her jaw tight. "Where are you going?" I turned toward the nurse and said gently, "To see someone I haven't seen in a long time, someone who always believed in me." And with that, I walked out of the nursing home. David called after me, but I didn't turn around, because the next place I was going to, that's where the real plan began. The air outside was cool and sharp, carrying that early autumn scent of fallen leaves and memory. As I stepped out of the nursing home, I didn't look back. For 70 years, I'd always been the one left behind, the one people forgot after they got what they wanted. Not this time. I walked slowly toward the main road, clutching my bag close. Inside it were the papers that now felt like my armor. My heart was beating fast, not out of fear, but out of something stronger resolve. A kind taxi driver stopped. "Need a ride, ma'am?" he asked. "Yes, please," I replied with a gentle smile. "To Greenfield Cemetery." He glanced at me through the mirror, surprised. "Visiting someone?" "Yes," I said quietly. "My husband." The ride was silent except for the hum of the engine. The world outside looked peaceful, but my thoughts were anything but. I was replaying every word Emily had said. She's a burden, she takes up space. I knew then that this wasn't about me being old. It was about her wanting control over David, over the house, over everything that carried my husband's memory. When I arrived, I walked through the rows of headstones until I found his Richard Johnson, 1945-2015. My knees ached as I knelt down and brushed away the fallen leaves covering his name. "Oh, Richard," I whispered, tears blurring my eyes. "They want to put me away, love. Just like I was never part of this family." For a moment, the silence around me felt heavy. Then, a small gust of wind brushed my cheeks soft, like a hand on my face. I smiled faintly. "I know," I whispered. "You always said I was stronger than I thought." I reached into my bag and pulled out the second envelope from the box, the life insurance policy. I'd never opened it before, afraid of what it might remind me of. But now, I needed to. My husband had named me as the sole beneficiary, with a clause I had completely forgotten about. If I ever chose to sell the property or transfer ownership, a significant part of the payout would go into a trust fund for Lily, my granddaughter. My heart softened at the thought of her little face, her laughter echoing in the garden when she visited. She was innocent in all this. I wouldn't let her grow up in a home poisoned by greed. I smiled through my tears. "All right, Richard, I see what you did here," I whispered. "You were protecting us both, even after all these years." As I stood, I noticed a familiar face walking toward me. It was Helen, my closest friend from church. She'd always been the kind of woman who noticed everything, even when you tried to hide it. "Margaret," she said, concern written all over her face. "I didn't expect to see you here. Are you all right?" I nodded, though my throat was tight. "I'm fine, Helen. Just paying my respects." I'm not. She sighed and reached for my hand. "You've been quiet lately. Everyone's worried about you. What's going on?" For the first time, I told her everything. About Emily's words, about David's silence, about how I pretended not to hear. Helen's eyes darkened. "Oh, honey," she said softly, "you don't deserve that. You've given that boy everything." "I know," I whispered, "but now I have to give him something else, a lesson." She tilted her head. "What kind of lesson?" I smiled. "Small, but certain. One that will remind him what family really means." Helen nodded slowly. "I trust you. You've always had a good heart. Just be careful, okay?" "I will," I said, hugging her tightly. "And thank you." When I got home later that evening, the house was quiet. The smell of Emily's expensive candles filled the air, but it no longer felt like my home. She was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. When she saw me, she raised an eyebrow. "Oh, you're back," she said flatly. "We thought you might stay and get used to the place." I smiled. "It wasn't for me, dear. Too quiet. Too lifeless." Her expression tightened. "Well, David's been worried. You could have at least told us where you were going." "I didn't realize you'd care," I replied softly, walking past her toward the stairs. She turned sharply. "Excuse me?" "I stopped halfway up the steps," I said. I turned slightly, meeting her glare. "I didn't realize you'd care." Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't respond. That night, I went into my room and sat by the window, watching the lights from the street fade into the darkness. My heart was calm, my mind sharper than ever. I had already made my next move. The following morning, I got dressed in my best coat and called my lawyer, Mr. Turner, a man who had been my husband's friend for years. "Mr. Turner," I said, "I need to update my will, urgently." He agreed to meet me at his office that afternoon. When I arrived, he looked at me kindly. "Margaret, it's been a while. What brings you in?" I placed the documents on his desk. "I want to make sure my son and his wife understand something important," I said. "Love doesn't mean you can take advantage of people. And family isn't something you can buy. He nodded slowly, understanding the tone in my voice. What exactly do you want to do? I want the house sold after my passing, I said calmly. Half of the proceeds should go into a trust for Lily. The rest I want donated to the local orphanage and church. He looked surprised. Not to David? I smiled faintly. He already has enough. Sometimes, losing something is the only way a person learns what it meant to them. He leaned back in his chair, nodding with quiet respect. You're a wise woman, Margaret. I sighed softly. Wisdom often comes from heartbreak. When I returned home that evening, Emily was pacing in the living room. She turned quickly as I entered. Where were you? She demanded. I set down my handbag, keeping my voice calm. I had some errands to run. Errands? She scoffed. You've been out 2 days in a row. Are you hiding something? I looked at her for a long moment, then smiled. Emily, I've been hiding things my entire life. You just never cared enough to ask what. Her mouth opened slightly, but before she could speak, the front door opened and David walked in, looking tense. What's going on here? Ask your mother, Emily snapped. She's been acting strange lately. David sighed. Mom, please. We don't want drama. I smiled gently, picking up my scarf. Don't worry, David. There won't be any drama. But soon, there will be understanding. And with that, I walked past them both, leaving them standing in stunned silence. That night, as I sat alone in my room, I heard them arguing downstairs, voices sharp, words bitter. Emily was pushing harder, David trying to calm her. But something told me this wasn't just about me anymore. I looked out the window, the moonlight glowing across the garden where Lily once played. My heart softened again. She was my light, my reason to fight. Then my phone rang. It was a number I hadn't seen in years. Hello? I said softly. A deep, familiar voice answered. Mrs. Johnson? It's Mark. I used to work with your husband, Richard. I heard you needed some help. My eyes widened. Mark? After all these years? He chuckled warmly. He told me once, if you ever called, I should be ready. You said something about a plan? I smiled slowly. Yes, Mark, I think it's time. And that was the moment everything started to turn. That night, I barely slept. My mind buzzed with thoughts, plans, and quiet prayers. The phone call from Mark had stirred something deep inside me, a spark of the old strength I hadn't felt since Richard was alive. Mark was one of Richard's closest friends, a man who had once helped him start his construction company decades ago. He was loyal, smart, and most of all, discreet. Richard used to call him the man who fixes things quietly. Now I needed that quietness again. The next morning, I woke early, dressed neatly, and took the bus to the old coffee shop downtown, the same one where Richard and Mark used to meet for business talks. Mark was already there when I arrived, sitting in the corner booth, his silver hair slicked back and his glasses perched low on his nose. Margaret, he said warmly, standing up to hug me. You haven't changed much. I smiled faintly. Oh, I've changed plenty. Life will do that to you. We sat down, and after the waitress poured our coffee, Mark leaned forward. So, he said quietly, tell me what's going on. I told him everything. From the night I overheard Emily calling me a burden, to pretending not to hear, to discovering the deeds and insurance policy, and to their plan of sending me away to a nursing home. Mark listened carefully, his face calm, but his eyes burning with quiet anger. When I finished, he took a slow sip of coffee. Richard always worried about something like this, he said finally. That's why he left you those papers. He trusted you'd know when to use them. I nodded. And now, I think I do. I want to teach them a lesson not with shouting, but with silence and strategy. He raised an eyebrow. What do you have in mind? I smiled slightly. Something that will make them realize the value of what they almost threw away. Mark leaned back. I liked the sound of that. I explained my idea, one that had come to me while staring at the insurance policy. I would act as though I was preparing to leave the house for good. But before I did, I'd make sure that everything, the property, the bank account, even the family heirlooms, was moved under temporary trust control, legally sealed off. That meant David and Emily couldn't touch a single thing until I decided otherwise. Then, I'd disappear for a little while, long enough for them to feel what life was like without me. Mark's smile widened. So you'll make them believe they've won, only to realize they've lost everything? Exactly, I said, my eyes steady. Not out of spite, but to open their eyes. Sometimes love needs to hurt before it heals. He nodded, his voice warm with admiration. Richard would be proud of you. That afternoon, Mark helped me make the necessary arrangements. He called a lawyer friend to draft the trust documents and helped me set up a private account to transfer my funds. By evening, everything was in motion. When I got home, Emily was sitting on the couch, painting her nails a bright red. David was beside her, half listening as she talked about some expensive furniture she wanted. Mom, he said without looking up, we were going to call you about the nursing home. I've already made up my mind, I said calmly. They both looked up, surprised. I'll be leaving soon, I continued. You don't have to worry about a thing. Emily's eyes sparkled. Really? That's wonderful news, Margaret. We'll help you pack. I smiled gently, cutting her off. No need, dear. I've already packed what I need. Her excitement dimmed slightly at my calmness, but she didn't question it. She thought she had finally gotten what she wanted. Later that night, I called Lily's school to arrange something special. I didn't want her to be caught in the middle of all this, but I also wanted her to remember me properly. I left a small envelope at her school office, addressed to her, containing a letter and a key. The letter explained that one day, when she was old enough, she could use that key to open a safe that would belong only to her. The next morning, I stood outside the house, suitcase in hand. Emily pretended to help me carry it to the car, though she barely touched it. David hugged me half-heartedly, his eyes full of guilt he didn't know how to express. Take care of yourself, Mom, he said softly. I smiled, placing a hand on his cheek. You too, David. Remember, love is not measured by comfort, but by kindness. Emily forced a polite smile. We'll visit soon. I'm sure you will, I replied, though we both knew she wouldn't. The taxi pulled up, and as I got in, I looked out the window one last time. The house looked beautiful under the morning sun, my roses blooming by the porch, the curtains swaying softly, but I felt no sadness, only peace. I gave the driver an address in the next town, Maplewood Haven, a small rental cottage owned by a widow I'd met at church. It was quiet, surrounded by trees, and far enough from everything to make them wonder where I'd gone. The next few days passed peacefully. For the first time in years, I had quiet mornings with my tea. No sharp voices, no tension. I walked by the lake, fed ducks, and talked to Helen on the phone. Have they called? She asked one afternoon. I smiled. Not yet. But they will. And she was right. 3 days later, my phone rang David's number. Mom! His voice was panicked. What happened? The bank said all the accounts are frozen, even the house documents. What did you do? I kept my voice calm. Oh, don't worry, dear. I'm simply making sure everything is safe. Safe? He repeated, confused. Mom, Emily is furious. We can't even... I interrupted gently. David, I heard what she said that night. Silence. I pretended not to hear, I continued softly, because I wanted to see if you'd defend me, but you didn't. And that silence told me everything. His breathing grew shaky. Mom, No, I said, firmly but kindly. Don't explain. Just think. Think about what it means to love someone who once loved you enough to give up everything. He was silent for a long time. Then, in a small voice, he whispered, "Where are you?" I smiled faintly. Somewhere peaceful. Somewhere your father would have loved. And then, I ended the call. That night, I sat by the window of the cottage, the moon shining bright over the quiet lake. For the first time in a long while, I felt in control, not out of pride, but out of purpose. But peace doesn't last forever. 2 days later, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, I froze. Emily stood there, her face pale, her eyes wide, not with anger this time, but with fear. "Margaret," she said shakily, "please, we need to talk." Her hands were trembling. And in that moment, I realized something had gone very, very wrong back at the house. When I saw Emily standing on my doorstep, I almost didn't recognize her. The woman who once strutted around my house in silk robes and diamond earrings now looked completely different, her hair messy, face pale, eyes red from crying. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the wind rustling the leaves outside the cottage. "Margaret," she whispered finally, "please, can I come in?" I stepped aside silently and gestured toward the small couch by the fireplace. She walked in slowly, glancing around the simple room like she'd entered another world. It wasn't a grand house, just a small, cozy place with wooden floors, soft light, and a scent of lavender tea. But to me, it was peace. I poured her a cup of tea and set it on the table. "Here," I said gently. "You look like you need it." She took it with shaking hands. "Thank you," she murmured, voice weak. We sat in silence for a few minutes. I didn't rush her. I just watched her carefully, the same way I used to watch her when she first came into our family, so beautiful, so confident. Now, she looked small, human. Finally, she spoke. I don't even know where to start," she said, tears filling her eyes. "Everything's falling apart." I folded my hands calmly. "Go on." She took a shaky breath. "After you left, David got a call from the bank. They said your lawyer had frozen all property assets and accounts connected to the estate. He was confused, but then he found out you'd moved everything into a trust. He tried to explain it to me, but Her voice cracked. I got angry. I said things I shouldn't have. We fought. He left the house that night. I stayed quiet, my eyes on her trembling hands. She continued, "He hasn't come back, Margaret. It's been 3 days. His phone is off. The police said he might just need time to cool off, but Her voice broke completely. "I think I broke him. I pushed too hard." She covered her face and started crying, her shoulders shaking. For a moment, I didn't move. The bitterness inside me, the part that wanted her to feel pain, flickered like a candle in the wind. But then I saw something else. Not the cruel woman who had called me a burden, but a scared, broken one. "Emily," I said softly, "look at me." She lifted her tear-streaked face. "When you first married David, do you remember the first dinner we had together?" She nodded weakly. "Yes, you made roast chicken and apple pie." I smiled faintly. "And you told me you'd take care of him better than anyone ever could. You said he was your heart." Tears spilled down her cheeks again. "I meant it. I swear I did. But I got tired, Margaret. The bills, the stress, the house, everything felt like too much. And then when you moved in..." She stopped, realizing her words, and looked down in shame. I nodded slowly. "You felt like I took your space." She nodded again. And instead of talking to me, I said softly, you turned it into resentment. You forgot I wasn't your enemy. She wiped her face, crying harder. I know. I was wrong. I see it now. I took a deep breath and leaned forward, my voice calm but strong. Emily, when people forget kindness, life has a way of teaching it back painfully. You thought sending me away would make your life easier, but love doesn't grow where cruelty lives. She covered her mouth, crying quietly. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the soft ticking of the clock. Then, finally, I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the lake glowing under the setting sun. Emily, I said after a while, what if I told you that this isn't about punishment, that this was never revenge? She looked up, confused. I wanted you both to see what happens when you treat people as disposable, I continued. I wanted you to miss what love really felt like. Her voice was barely a whisper. You did. You made me see everything I refused to see. I turned to her. Then maybe it's time for something else, something I didn't think I'd ever do. She blinked through her tears. What? Forgive you. Her lips parted slightly, disbelief flashing across her face. You'd forgive me? After everything I said? After what we tried to do? I nodded slowly. Yes, because carrying hate is heavier than carrying hurt. For a few seconds, she just stared at me. Then, suddenly, she got up, walked across the room, and fell to her knees beside me. I'm so sorry, Margaret, she sobbed. I'm so sorry. I reached down, touching her shoulder gently. Get up, child. Life hasn't ended yet. You can still make it right. She looked up at me, her face full of guilt and relief all at once. How? How do I fix this? Find David, I said softly. And when you do, don't talk about money or houses or comfort. Talk about love, the kind that forgives. She nodded, wiping her tears. I will. I promise. Good, I said quietly, because tomorrow I'm coming home. Her eyes widened. You are? I smiled faintly. Yes. But not as the weak woman you thought you could send away. I'm coming back as who I've always been, your family. For the first time, a small, genuine smile appeared on her face. You have no idea how much that means to me. I think I do, I said gently. Now go. It's getting late, and if you find David before morning, tell him his mother's waiting for him. She hugged me tightly before leaving, and for the first time in years, it wasn't a fake hug, it was real, warm, human. When she drove off into the night, I sat by the fireplace, staring into the flames. My heart was heavy but calm. Revenge had brought me here, but forgiveness that brought me peace. Hours passed, the fire dimmed. The house grew quiet again. I was just about to go to bed when my phone buzzed. It was a text message from an unknown number. Mom, it's me. I'm coming home. I need to tell you something about Emily. Please, don't go anywhere. My breath caught. Something about that message felt wrong. The hairs on my neck stood up. I read it again. And then I noticed the number wasn't David's. It was one I hadn't seen in years. A chill ran through me as I whispered to the empty room. No, it can't be. Because that number used to belong to someone I thought was long gone. Someone who had every reason to stay buried in the past.